So happy you're here. Do you know what we're gonna do today? We are going to read a bit more of Winnie the Pooh. Would you like that? Okay. So, do you remember where we were last time? Chapter 2. That was it. Okay, so Chapter 2, in which Pooh goes visiting and gets into a tight place. Edward Bear, known to his friends as Winnie the Pooh, or Pooh for short, was walking through the forest one day, humming proudly to himself. He had made up a little hum that very morning as he was doing his stoutness exercises in front of the glass. Tra-la-la-la, tra-la-la-la, as he stretched up as high as he could go, and then tra-la-la-la, tra-la-hoo, hop, la, as he tried to reach his toes. After breakfast, he had said it over and over to himself until he had learned it off by heart. And now he was humming it right through, properly. It went like this. Tra-la-la-la, 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 rum-dum-diddle-dum. Diddle-iddle-iddle, diddle-iddle-iddle, rum-dum-diddle-dum. Well, he was humming this hum to himself and walking gaily along, wondering what everybody else was doing and what it felt like being somebody else, when suddenly he came to a sandy bank, and in the bank was a large hole. "Aha," said Pooh. "Rum-dum-diddle-dum. If I know anything about anything, that hole means rabbit. Have you ever seen a rabbit?" He said, and rabbit means company. He said, and company means food, and listening to me humming, and such like. Rum-tum-diddle-dum-dum. So he bent down, put his head into the hole, and called out, "Is anybody home?" There was a sudden scuffling noise from inside the hole, and then silence. "What I said was, 'Is anybody at home?'" called out Pooh very loudly. "No," said a voice, and then added, "You needn't shout so loud. I heard you quite well the first time." "Bother," said Pooh. "Isn't there anybody here at all?" "Nobody." Winnie the Pooh took his head out of the hole and thought for a little while, and he thought to himself, there must be something there, because somebody must have said nobody. So he put his head back in the hole and said, "Hello, Rabbit. Is that you?" "No," said Rabbit, in a different sort of voice this time. "But isn't that Rabbit's voice?" "I don't think so," said Rabbit. "It isn't meant to be." "Oh," said Pooh. He took his head out of the hole and had another think, and then he put it back and said, "Well, could you very kindly tell me where Rabbit is?" "He has gone to see his friend Pooh Bear, who is a great friend of his." "But this is me," said Bear, very much surprised. "What sort of me?" "Pooh Bear." "Are you sure?" said Rabbit, still more surprised. Quite sure," said Pooh. "Oh, well then, come in." So Pooh pushed and pushed and pushed his way through the hole, and at last he got in. "You were quite right, said Rabbit, looking at him all over. It is you. Glad to see you. Who did you think it was? Well, I wasn't sure. You know how it is in the forest. One can't have anybody coming into one's house. One has to be careful. What about a mouthful of something? Pooh always liked a little something at 11 o'clock in the morning, and he was very glad to see Rabbit getting out the plates and mugs, and when Rabbit said, "Honey or condensed milk with your bread?" he was so excited that he said, "Both." And then, so as not to seem greedy, he added, "But don't bother about the bread, please." He only wants honey and condensed milk, not the bread. And for a long time after that, he said nothing, until at last, humming to himself in a rather sticky voice, he got up, shook Rabbit lovingly by the paw, and said that he must be going. "Must you?" said Rabbit politely. "Well," said Pooh, "I could stay a little longer if you..." And he tried very hard to look in the direction of the larder. "As a matter of fact," said Rabbit, "I was going out myself directly." "Oh, well then, I'll be going. Goodbye." "Well, goodbye, if you're sure you won't have any more." "Is there any more?" asked Pooh quickly. Rabbit took the covers off the dishes and said, "No, there wasn't." "I thought not," said Pooh, nodding to himself. "Well, goodbye. I must be going on." So he started to climb out of the hole. He pulled with his front paws and pushed with his back paws, and in a little while his nose was out in the open again, and then his ears, and then his front paws, and then his shoulders, and then... "Oh, help," said Pooh. "I'd better go back." "Oh, bother," said Pooh. "I shall have to go on." "I can't do either," said Pooh. "Oh, help and bother." Now, by this time, Rabbit wanted to go for a walk too, and finding the front door full, he went out by the back door and came round to Pooh and looked at him. "Hello, are you stuck?" he asked. No," said Pooh carelessly. Just resting and thinking and humming to myself." "Here, give us a paw." Pooh Bear stretched out a paw, and Rabbit pulled and pulled and pulled. "Ow!" cried Pooh. "You're hurting." "The fact is," said Rabbit, "you're stuck." "It all comes," said Pooh crossly, "of not having front doors big enough." "It all comes," said Rabbit sternly, "of eating too much. I thought at the time," said Rabbit, "only I didn't like to say anything," said Rabbit. "That one of us was eating too much," said Rabbit, "and I knew it wasn't me," he said. Well, I shall go and fetch Christopher Robin." Christopher Robin lived at the other end of the forest, and when he came back with Rabbit, he saw the front half of Pooh. He said, "Silly old bear," in such a loving voice that everybody felt quite hopeful again. "I was just beginning to think," said Bear, sniffing slightly, "that Rabbit might never be able to use his front door again. I should hate that," he said. "And so should I," said Rabbit. "Use his front door again," said Christopher Robin. Of course he'll use his front door again. Good, said Rabbit. If we can't pull you out, Pooh, we might push you back. Rabbit scratched his whiskers thoughtfully and pointed out that when once Pooh was pushed back, he was back. And of course nobody was more glad to see Pooh than he was. Still, there it was. Some lived in trees and some lived underground. And you mean I'd never get out? Said Pooh. I mean, said Rabbit, that I haven't got so far. It seems a pity to waste it. Christopher Robin nodded. Then there's only one thing to be done, he said. We shall have to wait for you to get thin again. How long does getting thin take? Asked Pooh anxiously. About a week, I should think. But I can't stay here for a week. You can stay here all right, silly old bear. It's getting you out, which is so difficult. Well, we'll read to you, said Rabbit cheerfully. And I hope it won't snow, he added. And I say, old fellow, you're taking up a good deal of room in my house. Do you mind if I use your back legs as a towel horse? Because, I mean, there they are, doing nothing. And it would be very convenient just to hang towels on them. A week, said Pooh gloomily. What about meals? I'm afraid no meals, said Christopher Robin. Because of getting thin quicker, but we will read to you. Bear began to sigh, and then found he couldn't because he was so tightly stuck, and a tear rolled down his eye as he said, Then would you read a sustaining book such as would help and comfort a wedged bear in great tightness? So for a week, Christopher Robin read that sort of book at the north end of Pooh, and Rabbit hung his washing on the south end, and in between Bear felt himself getting slenderer and slenderer. And at the end of the week, Christopher Robin said, Now. So he took hold of Pooh's front paws, and Rabbit took hold of Christopher Robin, and all Rabbit's friends and relations took hold of Rabbit, and they all pulled together. And for a long time, Pooh only said, How? And Oh. And then all of a sudden he said, Boop, just as if a cork were coming out of a bottle. And Christopher Robin and Rabbit and all of Rabbit's friends and relations went head over heels backwards. And on the top of them came Winnie the Pooh free. So, with a nod of thanks to his friends, he went on with his walk through the forest, humming proudly to himself. But Christopher Robin looked after him lovingly and said to himself, Silly old bear. Yay, we finished chapter 2. Should we go one more chapter? That would be fun. Chapter 3 is called Chapter 3, in which Pooh and Piglet go hunting and nearly catch a woozle. Have you ever seen Piglet? Yes, he's a cute little pig. We'll see him in a book. Alright. Chapter 3. The Piglet lived in a very grand house in the middle of a beech tree. And the beech tree was in the middle of the forest. And the Piglet lived in the middle of the house. Next to his house was a piece of broken board which had Trespassers W on it. When Christopher Robin asked the piglet what it meant, he said it was his grandfather's name and had been in the family for a long time. Christopher Robin said you couldn't be called Trespassers W. And Piglet said yes, you could, because his grandfather was, and it was short for Trespassers Will, which was short for Trespassers William. And his grandfather had 2 names in case he lost one. Trespassers after an uncle, and William after Trespassers. I've got 2 names, said Christopher Robin carelessly. Well, there you are. That proves it, said Piglet. One fine winter's day when Piglet was brushing away the snow in front of his house, he happened to look up, and there was Winnie the Pooh. Pooh was walking around and round in the circle, thinking of something else, and when Piglet called to him, he just went on walking.
Hello, said Piglet. What are you doing?
Hunting, said Pooh.
Hunting what?
Trucking something, said Winnie the Pooh very mysteriously.
Trucking what?
said Piglet, coming closer. That's just what I was asking myself. I asked myself, what?
What do you think you'll answer?
I shall have to wait until I catch up with it, said Winnie the Pooh. Now look there. He pointed to the ground in front of him. What do you see there?
Tracks,
said Piglet.
Paw marks.
He gave a little squeak of excitement.
Oh, Pooh, do you think it's a woozle?
It may be, said Pooh. Sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. You can never tell with paw marks. With these few words, he went on tracking, and Piglet, after watching him for a minute or 2, ran after him. Winnie the Pooh had come to a sudden stop, and was bending over the tracks in a puzzled sort of way.
What's the matter?
asked Piglet. It's a very funny thing, said Bear, but there seem to be 2 animals now. This, whatever it is, has been joined by another, whatever it is, and the 2 of them are now proceeding in company. Would you mind coming with me, Piglet, in case they turn out to be hostile animals? Piglet scratched his ear in a nice sort of way and said that he had nothing to do until Friday, and would be delighted to come, in case it really was a woozle. You mean in case it really is 2 woozles? Said Winnie the Pooh, and Piglet said that anyhow he had nothing to do until Friday, so off they went together. There was a small spinney of large trees just here, and it seemed as if the 2 woozles, if that is what they were, had been going round a spinney. So round the spinney went Pooh and Piglet after them, Piglet passing the time by telling Pooh what his grandfather Trespassers W had done to remove stiffness after tracking, and how his grandfather Trespassers W had suffered in his later years from shortness of breath and other matters of interest, and Pooh wondering what a grandfather was like, and if perhaps this was 2 grandfathers they were after now, and if so, whether he would be allowed to take one home and keep it, and what Christopher Robin would say. And still the tracks went on in front of them. Suddenly Winnie the Pooh stopped and pointed excitedly in front of them. Look!
What?
said Piglet with a jump, and then, to show that he hadn't been frightened, he jumped up and down once or twice more in an exercising sort of way. The tracks, said Pooh. a third animal has joined the other two.
Pooh, cried Piglet. Do you think it's another Woozle?
No, said Pooh, because it makes different marks. It is either two Woozles in one, as it might be Whistle, or two, as it might be Whistles and one, if so it is Woozle. Let us continue to follow them. So they went on, feeling just a little anxious now, in case the three animals in front of them were of the hostile intent. And Piglet wished very much that his grandfather T.W. were there instead of elsewhere. And Pooh thought how nice it would be if they met Christopher Robin suddenly, but quite accidentally, and only because he liked Christopher Robin so much. And then, all of a sudden, Winnie the Pooh stopped again and licked the tip of his nose in a cooling manner, for he was feeling more hot and anxious than ever in his life before. There were 4 animals in front of them. Do you see, Piglet? Look at their tracks. 3 as it were Woozles, and 1 as it was Whistle. Another Woozle has joined them. And so it seemed to be. There were the tracks, crossing over each other here, getting muddled up with each other there, but quite plainly, every now and then the tracks of 4 sets of paws.
I think, said
Piglet, when he had licked the tip of his nose too, and found that it brought very little comfort.
I think that I have just remembered something. I have just remembered something that I forgot to do yesterday and shan't be able to do tomorrow. So I suppose I really ought to go back and do it now.
Oh, we'll do it this afternoon and I'll come with you, said Pooh.
It isn't the sort of thing you can do in the afternoon, said Piglet quickly. It's a very particular morning thing that has to be done in the morning. And if possible, between the hours of, what would you say the time was?
About 12, said Winnie the Pooh, looking at the sun.
Between, as I was saying, the hours of 12 and 12:05. So, really, dear old Pooh, if you'll excuse me. What's that?
Pooh looked up at the sky, and then, as he heard the whistle again, he looked up into the branches of a big oak tree, and then he saw a friend of his.
It's Christopher Robin, he said. Then you'll be all right, said Piglet. You'll be quite safe with him. Goodbye.
And he trotted off home as quickly as he could, very glad to be out of all danger again. Christopher Robin came slowly down his tree. Silly old bear, he said, what were you doing? First, you went around the spinney twice by yourself, and then Piglet ran after you, and you went around again together, and then you were just going around the 4th time. Wait a moment, said Winnie the Pooh, holding up his paw. He sat down and thought, in the most thoughtful way he could think. Then he fitted his paw into one of the tracks, and then he scratched his nose twice, and stood up. Yes, said Winnie the Pooh, I see now. I have been foolish and deluded, said he, and I am a bear of no brain at all. You're the best bear in all the world, said Christopher Robin soothingly. Am I? Said Pooh hopefully, and then he brightened up suddenly. Anyhow, he said, it is nearly luncheon time. So he went home for it. End of chapter 3. Yay! I say we do chapter 4 too. Yay! Chapter 4, in which Eeyore loses a tail and Pooh finds one. Eeyore is so cute. The old grey donkey, Eeyore, stood by himself in a thirsty corner of the forest, his front feet well apart, his head on one side, and thought about things. Sometimes he thought sadly to himself, why? And sometimes he thought, wherefore? And sometimes he thought, as much as which? And sometimes he didn't quite know what he was thinking about. So when Winnie the Pooh came stumping along, Eeyore was very glad to be able to stop thinking for a little in order to say, "How do you do?" in a gloomy manner to him. "And how are you?" said Pooh. Eeyore shook his head from side to side. "Not very how," he said. "I don't seem to have felt at all how for a long time." "Dear, dear," said Pooh, "I'm sorry about that. Let's have a look at you." So Eeyore stood there, gazing sadly at the ground, and Winnie the Pooh walked all round him once. "Why, what's happened to your tail?" he said in a surprise. "What has happened to it?" said Eeyore. "It isn't there." "Are you sure?" "Well, either a tail is there or it isn't there. You can't make a mistake about it, and yours isn't there." "Then what is?" "Nothing." "Let's have a look," said Eeyore, and he turned slowly round to the place where his tail had been a little while ago, and then, finding that he couldn't catch it up, he turned round the other way until he came back to where he was first, and then he put his head down and looked between his front legs, and at last he said with a long side sigh, "I believe you're right." "Of course I'm right," said Pooh. "That accounts for a good deal," said Eeyore gloomily. "It explains everything. No wonder." "You must have left it somewhere," said Winnie the Pooh. "Somebody must have taken it," said Eeyore. "How like them," he added after a long silence. Pooh felt that he ought to say something helpful about it, but didn't quite know what, so he decided to do something helpful instead. "Eeyore," he said solemnly, "I, Winnie the Pooh, will find your tail for you." "Thank you, Pooh," answered Eeyore. "You're a real friend," said he. "Not like some," he said. So Winnie the Pooh went off to find Eeyore's tail. It was a fine spring morning in the forest as he started out. Little soft clouds played happily in the blue sky, skipping from time to time in front of the sun as if they had come to put it out, and then sliding away suddenly so that the next might have his turn. Through them and between them the sun shone bravely, and a copse which had worn its furs all the year round seemed old and dowdy now beside the new green lace which the beeches had put on so prettily. Through copse and spinney marched Bear, now down open slopes of gorse and heather, over rocky beds of streams, up steep banks of sandstone, into the heather again, and so at last, tired and hungry, to the 100-acre wood, for it was in the 100-acre wood that Owl lived. "And if anyone knows anything about anything," said Bear to himself, "it's Owl, who knows something about something," he said. "Well, my name's not Winnie the Pooh," he said, "which it is, so there you are." Owl lived at the Chestnuts, an old-world residence of great charm, which was grander than anybody else's, or seemed so to Bear, because it had both a knocker and a bell pull. Underneath the knocker there was a notice which said, "Please ring if an answer is required." Underneath the bell pull there was a notice which said, "Please knock if an answer is not required." These notices had been written by Christopher Robin, who was the only one in the forest who could spell. For Owl, wise though he was in many ways, able to read and write and spell his own name, Wall, yet somehow went all to pieces over delicate words like measles and butter toast. Winnie the Pooh read the two notices very carefully, first from left to right, and afterwards, in case he had missed some of it, from right to left. Then, to make quite sure, he knocked and pulled the knocker, and he pulled and knocked the bell rope, and he called out in a very loud voice, "Owl, I require an answer. It's Bear speaking." And the door opened, and Owl looked out.
Hello, Pooh," he said. "How things?"
"Terrible and sad," said Pooh, "because Eeyore, who is a friend of mine, has lost his tail and is moping about it. So, could you very kindly tell me how to find it for him?"
"Well," said Owl, "the customary procedure in such cases that it follows."
What does crusty money proceed cake mean?" said Pooh, "for I am a bear of a very little brain, and long words bother me."
It means the thing to do."
"As long as it means that, I don't mind," said Pooh humbly.
The thing to do is as follows. First, issue a reward. Then,
"Just a moment," said Pooh, holding up his paw. "What do we do to this? What were you saying? You sneezed just as you were going to tell me."
I didn't sneeze."
"Oh, yes, you did, Owl."
Excuse me, Pooh?"
"I didn't. You can't sneeze without knowing it." "Well, you can't know it without something having been sneezed."
"What I said was, first issue a reward."
"You're doing it again," said Pooh sadly. "A reward," said Owl very loudly. "We write a notice to say that we will give a large something to anybody who finds Eeyore's tail." I see, said Pooh, nodding his head. "Talking about large somethings," he went on dreamily, I generally have a small something about this time in the morning." And he looked wistfully at the cupboard in the corner of Owl's parlour. "Just a mouthful of condensed milk or whatnot, with perhaps a lick of honey."
"Well then," said Owl, "we write out this notice and we put it up all over the forest."
A lick of honey," murmured Bear to himself, or not, as the case may be. And he gave a deep sigh and tried very hard to listen to what Owl was saying. But Owl went on and on, using longer and longer words, until at last he came back to where he started, and he explained that the person to write out this notice was Christopher Robin. It was he who wrote the ones on my front door for me. Did you see them, Pooh?" For some time now, Pooh had been saying yes and no in turn, with his eyes shut, to all that Owl was saying, and having said yes, last time he said no, not at all, now without really knowing what Owl was talking about.
"Didn't you see them?"
said Owl, a little surprised. Come and look at them now." So they went outside, and Pooh looked at the knocker and the notice below it, and he looked at the bell rope and the notice below it, And the more he looked at the bell rope, the more he felt that he had seen something like it somewhere else, sometimes before. "Handsome bell rope, isn't it?" said Owl. Pooh nodded. He reminds me of something. It reminds me of something, he said, but I can't think what. Where did you get it? "I just came across it in the forest, and it was hanging over a bush, and I thought at first somebody lived there, so I rang it, and nothing happened. And then I rang it again, very loudly, and it came off in my hand, and as nobody seemed to want it, I took it home. And..." "Oh," said Pooh solemnly, "you made a mistake. Somebody did want it." "Who?" "Eeyore, my dear friend Eeyore. He was fond of it." "Fond of it?" "Attached to it," said Winnie the Pooh sadly. So with these words he unhooked it and carried it back to Eeyore. And when Christopher Robin nailed it on its right place again, Eeyore frisked about the forest, waving his tail so happily that Winnie the Pooh came over all funny and had to hurry home for a little snack of something to sustain him. And wiping his mouth half an hour afterwards, he sang to himself proudly. "Who found the tail? I," said Pooh, "at a 2:45. Only it was 11:15, really. I found the tail." That's it. Next time we'll do chapter 5 and 6 and 7. Did you like it? I love Winnie the Pooh. I have so many more books of his adventures. I can't wait for us to read it. Alright, now I guess I'll let you go. I really hope I'll see you next week. Yeah. Great. Well then, see you next week.